The glint of metal caught my eye, vicious, menacing. They'd installed spike strips around my car. Honest to God, tire-shredding spike strips, all because I dared to grow tomatoes in my driveway. But I stumbled upon the one legal loophole the HOA president, that control freak Richard, never saw coming. What would you do if your neighbors tried to imprison you for growing your own food? Comment below where you're watching from. The police officer, Officer Miller, stared at the metal spike strips encircling my poor, trapped car, his jaw practically on the pavement. "And they did this because of vegetables?" he asked, scratching his head in pure bewilderment. "Tomatoes, officer," I corrected, my voice tight with suppressed fury. "Started with tomatoes." I gestured towards my driveway planters, now a sad, empty reminder of my once thriving garden. I never thought growing food would turn me into a prisoner in my own home. It all began 3 months ago, a Tuesday I'd never forget. That's when I lost my accounting job. The pink slip arrived, a cruel slap in the face, along with a final paycheck that wouldn't even cover next month's mortgage. That night, staring at a $200 grocery receipt while choking down a pathetically small $7 tomato salad, an idea sparked. A desperate, hopeful idea. The next day, I practically flew to Home Depot, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. I bought plastic planters, bags of rich, dark soil, and a collection of vibrant vegetable seedlings. My driveway, you see, got 6 glorious hours of perfect sunlight every day, wasted space that I could transform into a lifeline, a source of fresh food and significant savings. Within a week, 2 neat rows of containers lined both sides of my driveway, bursting with life. Plump tomatoes, spicy peppers, crisp zucchini, and fragrant herbs. My first harvest saved me a whopping $43, compared to the outrageous store prices. A wave of pride washed over me, watching those tiny green tomatoes swell and ripen under the warm sun. Some neighbors even stopped by, their faces alight with curiosity, asking for gardening tips. Old Mr. Garcia, bless his heart, brought me tomato cages he wasn't using anymore, a gesture of kindness that brought tears to my eyes. Then came the camera clicks, a lurking presence. Patricia, from across the street, stood perched on her impossibly perfect lawn, her blonde bob stiff with hairspray, snapping photos of my driveway garden like I was some kind of exhibit. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I called out, forcing a friendly wave, though my gut churned with unease. Patricia's smile was tight, like a stretched rubber band. "Just documenting some concerns for the community meeting," she replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She turned sharply, her tennis whites practically glowing, and marched back into her sterile, perfectly manicured existence. That evening, the email arrived, a cold, formal decree from Richard, president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association and Patricia's puppet. "Attention homeowner, at 476 Oakwood Drive," it blared. "Residential properties must maintain aesthetic standards. Your driveway setup violates Code 15.3. Please remedy within 7 days." My hands shook as I immediately opened our HOA handbook, a ridiculously thick tome of rules and regulations. I flipped through all the 43 pages, twice, my heart pounding in my chest. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere, did it specifically prohibit container gardens. Section 15.3 only mentioned keeping driveways clear of long-term storage items. These weren't storage items, they were actively growing food. The next morning, a handwritten note, scrawled in that annoyingly perfect cursive, was taped to my mailbox. "Gardens belong in backyards, not where everyone has to see them. Concerned neighbor." The handwriting, of course, matched Patricia's loopy script from last year's Christmas card. The passive-aggressive war had begun. Later that day, as I took out the trash, I saw them, Patricia and Richard, huddled at the corner like conspirators in a bad spy movie. Richard pointed towards my house, shaking his head with dramatic disapproval. Patricia nodded eagerly, a smug smile playing on her lips. They both beamed when they saw me watching. The audacity. 3 agonizing days later, a formal letter arrived, citing my agricultural activities as inconsistent with our community's residential character. The letter, a thinly veiled threat, warned of a $100 daily fine starting next week. My stomach dropped. My savings were dwindling faster than a melting ice cream cone on a hot summer day. That night, fueled by desperation and instant coffee, I dove into the murky world of HOA law, researching until 2 a.m. I learned about reasonable restrictions versus blatant overreach. I printed out the county's definition of landscaping, which specifically mentioned container gardening as permitted in residential zones. I was armed with information, but fear still gnawed at me. The next day, I became a neighborhood detective, walking the streets, my phone, my weapon. I took photos of every rule violation I could find. Holiday decorations, still up in April, tacky. Unapproved lawn ornaments, hideous. Basketball hoops, technically against the rules, but conveniently ignored. It was clear, only my gardens mattered. Only my attempt to save money and eat healthy food was deemed a crime. I drafted a response to Richard, citing county regulations and highlighting the blatant selective enforcement. My tone was polite but firm, my words carefully chosen. Before sending it, I knocked on Mr. Garcia's door, seeking his wisdom. "They're targeting you because Patricia wants to win the Neighborhood Beautification Award next month," he said, inviting me in for a cup of surprisingly strong coffee. "Her view from her front window includes your driveway. She's been complaining about eyesores to anyone who will listen." "But it's just vegetables," I exclaimed, exasperated. "I need to save money right now." Mr. Garcia nodded sadly. "Richard always sides with Patricia. Her husband plays golf with him every Sunday." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But they've made enemies. The Johnsons moved out last year after being fined because their daughter's wheelchair ramp was the wrong shade of beige." I sent my response letter, attaching copies of my research, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. 2 days of silence followed, an eerie calm before the storm. Then, early Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. Richard stood there, resplendent in a polo shirt embroidered with the HOA logo, Patricia lurking behind him like a poisonous shadow. "We've received your response," Richard said, his voice flat, refusing to meet my eyes. "The board has decided to schedule a special hearing about your situation." "This isn't personal," he added, though his clenched jaw suggested otherwise. "We just care deeply about maintaining our community standards," Patricia chimed in, her smile as fake as her tan. "Property values affect everyone." I noticed her phone, partially hidden behind her purse, discreetly recording our conversation. "I understand caring about our community," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "That's why I'm growing healthy food instead of letting my driveway sit empty. Nothing in our bylaws prohibits container gardens." Richard's face reddened. "The board interprets the rules, not individual homeowners. The hearing is Tuesday at 7 p.m. As they walked away, I heard Patricia whisper, "I told you they wouldn't cooperate." That afternoon, I found 5 neighbors with violation notices on their doors, all for minor infractions, all people who had stopped to admire my garden. Someone was sending a message, loud and clear. I stayed up late again, researching selective enforcement and HOA abuse of power, my anger growing with every click. And then I found it, a tiny glimmer of hope. Our county had a little-known Grow Your Own initiative that protected home food production. Could this be my lifeline? As I dug deeper into the dusty county records, I had no idea just how far Patricia and Richard would go to win this petty, ridiculous fight. I really underestimated their cruelty. Did you really think they'd just accept a vegetable garden in our neighborhood? My sister asked over the phone, her voice laced with disbelief. I was sending her videos of my destroyed planters, dirt and young plants scattered across my driveway like fallen soldiers. You won't believe what happened, I told her, my voice shaking with rage and grief. I went to buy groceries for just 1 hour and came back to this. The security camera I'd installed after finding that nasty note on my mailbox had caught everything. Patricia's son, Tyler, and 2 other teenagers had ridden their bikes down my driveway, deliberately kicking over 2 large planters of tomatoes and peppers. On the video, you could clearly hear Tyler say, "Mom says these need to go." The boys laughed, their youthful cruelty echoing in the empty space where my beautiful plants had once thrived. I was still cleaning up the mess, my hands trembling, when a police car pulled up. Officer Davis stepped out, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Someone reported suspicious activity at this address," he said, his voice apologetic. "A complaint about illegal farming." I showed him my container garden, or what was left of it, and explained the situation. He sighed. "HOA disputes are civil matters," he said, "but destruction of property is different." He watched my security footage, his expression hardening. "Those kids definitely knocked over your planters on purpose," Officer Davis confirmed. "Would you like to press charges for vandalism?" I hesitated. Escalating things might make everything worse, might make me the bad guy. "Not yet," I said, my voice weary, "but I'd like this documented." After he left, I marched across the street and rang Patricia's doorbell, my heart pounding a war drum in my chest. She answered, wearing gardening gloves, though her perfect lawn showed no signs of actual gardening. "I have video of Tyler destroying my plants," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, despite the turmoil inside. "Officer Davis has seen it too." Patricia's face flushed, but her expression remained cold, a mask of entitlement. "Those plants are an eyesore and attracting pests to the neighborhood," she snapped. "The HOA board has already discussed your situation." "Destroying property isn't the answer," I replied, my voice rising slightly. "And there are no pests. They're healthy plants and clean containers. This neighborhood had standards before you decided to turn your driveway into a farm," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your little hobby is affecting all our property values." As I turned to leave, she added, her voice a venomous whisper, "You should check your mail. The board voted yesterday." Sure enough, when I checked my mailbox, a certified letter awaited, a formal declaration of war. I had 72 hours to remove all agricultural implements from my driveway or face a $100 daily fine. The letter was signed by all 5 board members, their names a testament to their collective pettiness. The next morning, while watering my remaining plants, a wave of anger washed over me. It turned to shock and disbelief when I noticed several neighbors standing in their driveways, their faces etched with anger and frustration. Steve, from 3 houses down, walked over, waving a piece of paper. "Did you get one of these too?" he asked, showing me a violation notice for his basketball hoop, which had been there for 4 years without a single complaint. "They're targeting anyone who's been friendly with me," I realized aloud, a chilling sense of isolation creeping in. "Richard's been fining people for years over ridiculous things," Steve said, shaking his head in disgust. "My disabled mother couldn't paint her ramp the approved beige fast enough last year, and he fined her $200. By noon, I'd counted 5 neighbors with sudden violation notices, all for items that had been ignored for months, even years. A bird feeder, a decorative gnome, wind chimes, a little free library box. This was a targeted attack, a campaign of intimidation. "This is all about your garden," said Sophia, my next-door neighbor, her voice tight with anger. Her notice cited unapproved landscaping for flowers she'd planted 2 summers ago. "Patricia's been bragging at book club about cleaning up the neighborhood, starting with your farm problem." I invited everyone over that evening, extending an olive branch, a call to arms. To my surprise, 8 neighbors showed up, each with their own tales of Richard and Patricia's selective enforcement, their petty tyranny. "They only care about rules when it benefits them," said James, a long-time resident, his voice filled with years of pent-up frustration. Richard built a shed 2 feet larger than allowed, but the board granted him a special exception. "And Patricia's koi pond required a variance," Sophia added, her eyes flashing, "which was approved in record time." We agreed to attend the next HOA meeting together, a united front. Strength in numbers seemed like our only hope. When everyone left, I returned to my research, my determination renewed. I documented every inconsistency in our neighborhood, every instance of selective enforcement, with photos and dates. I was building a case, brick by brick. The next morning, a landscaping truck parked in front of my house, a hulking metal beast. 2 men in uniforms approached my door, their expressions grim. "HOA sent us to remove unauthorized plantings," the taller one said, handing me a work order signed by Richard himself. "You don't have permission to touch anything on my property," I replied firmly, my voice shaking slightly. "Please leave now." They looked at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. "We were told the homeowner had been notified," the second man said, his voice hesitant. "I've received notices, but I'm contesting them as selective enforcement," I explained, my voice gaining strength. "If you remove anything without my permission, it's destruction of private property." They eventually left, but an hour later, another email from Richard arrived, his tone dripping with smug satisfaction. "Your refusal to comply leaves us no choice but to pursue all available remedies." That afternoon, while working from home, I noticed Patricia leading 3 women on a tour of the neighborhood, like she was showing off a prize-winning pig. When they reached my house, Patricia pointed dramatically at my driveway garden, her face a mask of disdain. The women shook their heads in apparent disgust, their judgment palpable. That evening, another certified letter arrived, this time a formal cease and desist, threatening legal action if my agricultural activities weren't terminated within 48 hours. I felt a surge of panic, but then a flicker of hope. I called the county housing authority immediately and spoke with a clerk named Marcus. "HOAs have power, but they're not above the law," Marcus explained, his voice calm and reassuring. "I suggest you check if your subdivision has any agricultural heritage protections in its original plan." "Agricultural heritage?" I asked, my mind racing. "Many developments here were built on former farmland," Marcus explained. "Some have special clauses protecting residents' rights to grow food, usually in the original covenants." I thanked him profusely and immediately drove to the county records office, arriving just before closing time, my heart pounding with anticipation. The clerk, a kind woman with tired eyes, helped me locate my subdivision's original documents from 1992. Flipping through the dusty pages, my heart leaped when I found it. Section 8, a beacon of hope in a sea of legal jargon. In accordance with the County Agricultural Heritage Protection Act, it read, "Homeowners retain the right to cultivate food-producing plants on their property provided such cultivation does not create hazardous conditions." I took photos of every page, my hands shaking with excitement. This was it. This was the loophole, the legal shield I desperately needed. This could change everything. Returning home, I found my newly planted containers had been doused with something that reeked of bleach, a chemical assault on my dreams. All the plants were wilting, discolored, their vibrant life draining away. As I stood there, stunned and heartbroken, Patricia drove by slowly, a triumphant smile plastered on her face, waving from her car window like the Queen of England. I didn't realize then that chemical sabotage was just the beginning of what she had planned. Her cruelty knew no bounds. My jaw dropped, literally hanging open in disbelief when I saw what they were doing to my driveway. I was eating breakfast, a bowl of oatmeal that suddenly tasted like ash when I heard a strange scraping noise outside. I rushed to the window and couldn't believe my eyes. Two men, clad in bright yellow Maple Creek maintenance vests, were installing metal strips studded with sharp, menacing spikes along both sides of my driveway. These weren't just any barriers, they were actual spike strips, the kind police use, designed to shred tires if I even thought about driving over them. "Hey, stop right now!" I yelled, bursting out the front door, still clutching my half-eaten bowl of oatmeal, my voice a mix of fury and disbelief. The workers barely looked up. The older one, his beard a grizzled grey, mumbled, "Just following HOA orders, ma'am. Nothing personal." "Orders for what? To trap me in my own home?" My voice shook as I pulled out my phone and started recording. A desperate attempt to document this insanity. The younger worker, at least, had the decency to look embarrassed, his cheeks flushing red. "It's called property demarcation for code violations," he stammered. "We're just doing our job." I immediately called the police, pacing back and forth behind my now imprisoned car like a caged animal. Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, but his response made my stomach sink. "I understand you're upset," he said, flipping through his notepad, his expression apologetic but firm. "But this appears to be a civil matter between you and your homeowners association. They do have authority to mark property violations according to your community covenant. But they've trapped my car. I can't leave without destroying my tires." I pointed to the wicked-looking metal teeth, gleaming in the morning sun like the jaws of some monstrous beast. Officer Martinez frowned, his brow furrowing. "That does seem excessive. Have you tried contacting your HOA representative directly?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I marched straight to Richard's house, my hands shaking with a rage I'd never felt before. I never got to his door because Patricia, like a perfectly coiffed guardian of suburban tyranny, appeared out of nowhere, blocking my path in the middle of the street. Her perfectly highlighted hair didn't move an inch as she held up her phone, recording our encounter, a smug smirk playing on her lips. "Well, well, if it isn't Farmer Jones," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Those spike strips must be quite inconvenient." "This is illegal," I shouted, trying to maintain my composure but failing miserably. "You can't trap someone on their property." Patricia's eyes narrowed, two cold blue chips of ice. "You've been warned repeatedly about your vegetable disaster. The board voted unanimously last night." She waved a folder of papers, her voice rising in triumph. "Those unsightly planters violate 3 separate HOA codes and lower all our property values. My sister is a real estate agent, and she says houses on your street are already getting lower offers." "That's ridiculous," I retorted, my voice shaking. "We're in a housing boom, and my planters are neat and well-maintained. Farms belong in the country, not in Maple Creek estates," she snapped, her voice venomous. "Remove those plants, and we'll remove the barriers. Simple as that." Richard appeared behind her, his arms crossed, his expression smug. "We've had complaints from 7 different homeowners. This isn't personal, it's about maintaining standards." As they walked away, I heard Patricia laugh, a cruel, grating sound. Maybe she can grow enough to feed herself, since she won't be able to drive to the grocery store. I felt utterly trapped and desperate. My doctor's appointment was tomorrow, and I needed to pick up my mum from her physical therapy this afternoon. This was beyond a petty dispute. This was a deliberate attempt to isolate and control me. I called 5 different tire shops, my hope dwindling with each call. But the spikes were designed to cause maximum damage. No temporary fix would work. That night, instead of crying, I got angry. And then I got smart. I drove my riding lawnmower, carefully avoiding the spikes, to my neighbor Ellie's house and borrowed her car, a surge of defiance coursing through me. Then I headed downtown to the county records office, which thankfully stayed open late on Wednesdays. The clerk, a bored-looking young man, barely glanced up as I requested the original subdivision plans and covenants for Maple Creek Estates. "Property dispute?" he asked, his voice monotone. "You could say that," I replied, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. 3 hours later, surrounded by dusty documents and property maps illuminated by the flickering fluorescent lights, I found it. The single, crucial piece of information the HOA had either overlooked or deliberately hidden. My hands trembled as I made copies, my mind racing with possibilities. This wasn't just a way out of my current situation. This was a nuclear bomb, a way to dismantle the entire corrupt system. I drove home in Ellie's car, lightning flashing across the sky, illuminating the monstrous spike strips that surrounded my driveway. But for the first time all day, I smiled. Richard and Patricia had no idea what was coming. They had severely underestimated their opponent. "They installed what around your driveway?" Sarah Jenkins, the best property rights lawyer in the county, nearly spat out her coffee when I showed her the photos of the spike strips. I'd found her number on a community board at the records office and called her first thing in the morning, my voice shaking with urgency. "Spike strips, like the police use to stop criminals," I explained, sliding the manila folder of documents across her sleek, modern desk. "They're basically holding me hostage until I remove my vegetable garden." Sarah adjusted her glasses and examined the papers I'd found, her expression shifting from disbelief to amusement to outright glee. After 10 minutes of silent reading, she started laughing. Not a small chuckle, but a full-blown belly laugh that made her assistant peek in to see what was happening. "In 15 years of practicing HOA law," she said, tapping the oldest document in the pile, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief, "I've never seen a board make such a massive mistake. Your entire subdivision was built on land designated under the County Agricultural Heritage Protection Act of 1998. It was originally the Henderson family farm, and when they sold it to developers, they included a special covenant." She pointed to a paragraph written in dense, impenetrable legal language. "This says all homeowners retain the explicit right to grow food on their property, and that right shall not be infringed by any future homeowners association or governing body. This can't be overridden by HOA bylaws they created later." My heart pounded with a surge of hope, so strong it almost knocked me off my chair. "So, my garden is completely legal?" "More than legal, it's specially protected," Sarah said, already typing furiously on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "And those spike strips? That's unlawful detention, possibly even criminal. We're filing an emergency injunction right now." By noon, the paperwork was submitted to the county court, a legal missile aimed straight at the heart of the HOA's tyranny. Sarah suggested I document everything, so I posted a single photo of the spike strips on my neighborhood's social media group with a simple caption, "Is this how HOAs should solve disputes about vegetable gardens?" The post exploded. It was like throwing a lit match into a gasoline-soaked pile of dry leaves. By 3 p.m., a reporter from Channel 7 News knocked on my door, followed by 2 more news vans, their cameras hungry for drama. My phone buzzed constantly, with messages from neighbors I'd never even met, sharing their own HOA horror stories, their voices filled with outrage and support. We're live at Maple Creek Estates, where a homeowner claims the HOA installed dangerous spike strips around her car, all because she grew tomatoes in decorative planters. The reporter announced into the camera on my front lawn, her voice filled with professional concern. I was explaining the situation, my voice calm and measured, when a black SUV screeched to a halt across the street. Patricia practically flew out of the passenger door, with Richard right behind her, both looking like they'd swallowed lemons whole. "Turn those cameras off," Richard shouted, storming across my lawn, his face a mask of fury. "This is a private neighborhood matter." The reporter, sensing ratings gold, signaled her cameraman to keep rolling. "Mr. Thompson, as HOA president, did you authorize the installation of these tire-puncturing devices?" Patricia pushed in front of the microphone, her voice shrill. "This is completely one-sided. She's violated multiple community standards with that eyesore." She pointed dramatically at my neat row of planter boxes, where cherry tomatoes ripened in the sun, a symbol of my defiant resilience. "Those eyesores help feed my family," I said calmly, knowing my composed response would contrast sharply with their uncontrolled anger. "And nothing in the HOA guidelines prohibits container gardens." The cameras followed as Patricia and Richard retreated, then marched up my walkway, their faces contorted with rage. Once the news crew left, Patricia's perfectly manicured nail jabbed toward my face. "You're making us look like monsters on social media," she hissed, her face flushed crimson. "You installed spike strips around my car," I reminded her evenly. "How would you describe that?" Richard stepped forward, lowering his voice, attempting to sound reasonable, a pathetic attempt at damage control. "Look, we can resolve this quietly. Remove your garden. We'll remove the strips and forget the violations. No lawyers, no media circus." I took a deep breath and pulled out the copy Sarah had prepared, the document that held my freedom, my future. "I have a counter-offer," I replied, handing them the agricultural heritage documents, my voice steady. "Remove the strips immediately, or I continue with my lawsuit, which now includes false imprisonment, harassment, and violation of protected agricultural rights." Their faces transformed as they read, a slow-motion train wreck of emotions. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally, the dawning realization of their colossal, irreversible mistake. But instead of backing down, Richard's face hardened. He snatched the papers and, in a moment of pure childish rage, tore them in half. "We'll see what our lawyers say about your little farm loophole," he sneered. "The HOA has a $300,000 legal defense fund, and we're not afraid to use it. Do you have that kind of money?" As they stormed off, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Judge Watkins is reviewing our emergency motion right now. Stay strong." I tried to focus on watering my plants that evening, but worry gnawed at me, a persistent, unwelcome guest. What if the judge sided with the HOA? What if Richard was right about their legal fund outlasting my meager savings? At 2:17 a.m., my security camera's alert woke me up, a jarring sound in the stillness of the night. The motion-activated floodlights revealed a figure hunched by my garden, a shadowy figure engaged in an act of cowardly destruction. It was Patricia's husband, Tom, wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm night, garden shears glinting in his hands like weapons. On my phone screen, I watched in disbelief as he systematically cut through every irrigation line connecting my self-watering system, then slashed the soil bags I'd stored for next season, a deliberate act of sabotage. I called the police immediately, and this time they took it seriously. Officer Martinez arrived within minutes, catching Tom still on my property, his face a mask of shock and fear when the police car lights flashed. Mrs. Walker claims you've been harassing her, and now we find you vandalizing her property at 2 a.m., Officer Martinez said, making notes, his voice stern. Tom stammered excuses, his words tumbling over each other. My husband was just checking for the rats around her garden, Patricia insisted, having rushed over in her silk bathrobe, her hair a mess, her composure shattered. Those vegetable plants attract vermin. Officer Martinez picked up the garden shears, his expression skeptical. With these, ma'am, we have the whole incident on security video. As Tom was escorted to the police car for questioning, I noticed several neighbors watching from their windows, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights. Steve from down the street gave me a thumbs up. Ellie waved encouragingly. For the first time, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. My phone chimed with an email from Sarah. Emergency hearing scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. We've got them cornered. As dawn broke over my imprisoned car and damaged garden, I felt strangely calm, a sense of quiet determination settling over me. The HOA had seriously underestimated who they were dealing with. Tomorrow would change everything, not just for me, but for our entire community. The courtroom fell silent, a hushed anticipation hanging in the air as Judge Watkins entered. Her stern expression gave nothing away, her gaze sharp and unwavering. My stomach twisted into knots, a jumble of nerves and hope. I spotted Richard and Patricia sitting confidently with their attorney, a sleek man in an expensive suit who kept whispering in Richard's ear, a picture of smug arrogance. They had 3 people on their side of the room, a formidable force. I was surprised and deeply touched to see over 20 of my neighbors had shown up to support me, filling the benches behind Sarah and me, a silent army of solidarity. Before we begin, Judge Watkins said, adjusting her glasses, her voice resonating with authority, I want to make something very clear. I reviewed the evidence until midnight, and I am deeply troubled by what I've seen. Richard's attorney stood up smoothly, his voice oozing practiced confidence. Your Honor, if I may... You may not, Judge Watkins cut him off sharply, her voice like a whip crack. Mr. Parker, I've read your brief. Now, I want to see these spike strips for myself. The courtroom screens lit up with my photos and videos, a stark visual record of the HOA's outrageous actions. Several people gasped at the images of the metal teeth, vicious and menacing, surrounding my driveway. Mr. Thompson, the judge addressed Richard directly, her voice unwavering. HOA President, did you authorize these devices to be installed? Richard stood, straightening his tie, his face a mask of forced composure. Yes, Your Honor, but they were simply property markers to indicate a violation zone, not meant to... They are designed to puncture tires, Judge Watkins interrupted, her voice rising slightly. The maintenance company's invoice specifically lists them as vehicle deterrent spike systems. Did you or did you not intend to prevent Miss Walker from using her vehicle? When Richard hesitated, his carefully constructed facade crumbling, Patricia jumped up, her voice shrill and defensive. She was breaking the rules. We gave her multiple warnings about that garden. The judge's gavel banged sharply, a resounding echo in the silent courtroom. Mrs. Davis, you are not recognized to speak. Please sit down. Sarah presented the agricultural heritage documents next, her voice clear and confident, explaining how they predated and superseded any HOA regulations. Richard's lawyer argued that modern community standards should take precedence, but his voice faltered, his arguments weak and unconvincing, when Judge Watkins held up the original covenant, her expression unwavering. This language is crystal clear, she said, her voice resonating with authority. The right to grow food on one's property is explicitly protected. Furthermore, there's nothing in the current HOA guidelines that specifically prohibits container gardening. Then came the security footage from last night, the damning evidence of Tom Davis cutting my irrigation lines at 2:17 a.m. A cowardly act of vandalism caught on camera. Patricia's face turned crimson, a mixture of shame and fury as her husband's actions played on the screens for all to see. Mr. Davis has already been charged with criminal vandalism, Officer Martinez testified, his voice calm and professional. He admitted Mrs. Davis asked him to do something about the garden situation. After just 40 minutes of arguments, a remarkably short time considering the gravity of the situation, Judge Watkins delivered her ruling, her voice ringing with righteous indignation. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff," she announced, her words a hammer blow against the HOA's tyranny. The Maple Creek Estates HOA's actions constitute unlawful detainment, harassment, and violation of protected property rights. Her voice hardened, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. Installing physical barriers, preventing a homeowner from using their vehicle, is particularly troubling. This court does not look kindly on vigilante enforcement tactics. My eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief and vindication, as she continued. The HOA is ordered to remove the spike strips immediately within the hour. They will pay damages of $15,000, reimburse all legal fees, and repair all vandalized garden equipment. She looked directly at Richard, her expression stern and unforgiving. Additionally, I am mandating new HOA board elections within 30 days, supervised by a court-appointed observer. Richard's face went from red to white, a complete collapse of his smug arrogance. Patricia buried her face in her hands, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. "Your Honor," Richard's attorney began, his voice shaky, "we intend to appeal." "That is your right," Judge Watkins nodded, her voice unwavering. "However, the removal order and election requirement will not be stayed during any appeal. And Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Davis, if there is any further harassment of Ms. Walker, this court will not hesitate to find you in contempt. Are we clear?" They nodded silently, defeated and humiliated, their reign of terror brought to an abrupt end. As we left the courtroom, Sarah squeezed my arm, her eyes sparkling with triumph. "This is a bigger win than you might realize," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "This case creates a precedent for thousands of homeowners in similar situations." When I turned onto my street that afternoon, I couldn't believe my eyes. A crowd had gathered outside my house, a sea of familiar faces, and at first, I feared the worst. Had Patricia organized some kind of protest, a last-ditch effort to intimidate me? But as I got closer, I realized they were my neighbors, cheering and clapping, their faces beaming with joy and support. The maintenance crew was already removing the spike strips, their yellow vests a stark contrast to the celebratory atmosphere under Officer Martinez's watchful eye. Steve, from down the block, approached my car window, his grin wide and infectious. "We watched the hearing on the court's live stream," he grinned. "You stood up for all of us." He handed me a beautiful ceramic planter, painted with vibrant sunflowers, a symbol of hope and resilience. "For our neighborhood's defender." Tears filled my eyes again, tears of gratitude and relief, as Ellie and her husband unveiled a handmade sign they'd created. Maple Creek Community Gardens, growing together. They'd collected signatures from over 50 neighbors who wanted to start a shared garden space in the unused land behind the neighborhood playground, a testament to the power of unity and shared purpose. "We never knew about that agricultural heritage clause," Ellie explained, her eyes shining with excitement. "It applies to the whole subdivision, Not just your property. We've been wanting community garden space for years. Over the next few weeks, something amazing happened. My little victory, my stand against tyranny, rippled outward, creating waves of change I never could have imagined. Richard resigned from the HOA board completely and, in a move that surprised no one, put his house up for sale. The new board, led by Steve and Mrs. Johnson from Maple Street, approved the community garden project unanimously, their enthusiasm infectious. Even more surprising were the visitors from other neighborhoods. We heard about what happened here, a woman from Oak Ridge Estates told me, as she admired my thriving tomato plants, their red fruit gleaming in the sun. Our HOA has been just as bad. Can you tell us how you found that original covenant? I expanded my own garden, adding a small sign. Community harvest, take what you need, a symbol of generosity and shared abundance. The children from the neighborhood started stopping by after school, their eyes wide with curiosity, fascinated by the magic of how food grows. Mrs. Gonzalez, who had initially signed Patricia's complaint petition, sheepishly asked for gardening tips when her granddaughter became captivated by my strawberry plants, a testament to the power of forgiveness and understanding. I was wrong, she admitted, her voice filled with remorse, watching her granddaughter carefully water the seedlings I'd given them. Patricia kept saying these plants would bring down our property values, but my daughter's family is now considering moving here because of the community garden. Patricia still lives across the street, but now she crosses to the other side when she sees me coming, a silent acknowledgement of her defeat. Tom completed his community service hours by, ironically, helping build raised beds for the new community garden space. He turned out to be quite skilled at carpentry when not sneaking around cutting irrigation lines, a redemption arc I never expected. The biggest surprise came 3 months later. I was invited to speak at the County Planning Commission about urban agriculture rights, a platform I never imagined I'd have. 3 nearby HOA communities wanted help establishing their own community garden spaces, inspired by our story, a testament to the ripple effect of one person's courage. Your case has become something of a legend, the commissioner told me, his voice filled with admiration. People are demanding to know what rights they actually have under these restrictive HOAs. This morning, as I harvested the last tomatoes of the season from my driveway planters, their vibrant red, a symbol of resilience and victory, I noticed faint marks still visible on the concrete, scars from where the spike strips had been. I couldn't help but smile. They're a reminder that standing up for what's right can change more than just your own situation. It can inspire a community, ignite a movement, and even change the law. My phone chimed with a text from Sarah. Her words a final, triumphant exclamation point. Guess what? State legislature just introduced the Homeowner Food Freedom Act, and they mentioned your case by name. I looked at my flourishing garden, then at the community garden beyond, where neighbors worked together, their laughter and chatter mingling with the gentle hum of bees, among rows of vegetables and flowers. Sometimes, the most beautiful harvests aren't the ones you can eat, but the connections and changes that grow from standing your ground, from refusing to be silenced, from daring to plant a seed of hope in the face of adversity. And it all started because one small garden made Patricia so angry she couldn't see past her own rulebook long enough to check the actual law. As my grandfather used to say, before you dig up someone else's garden, make sure you know whose land you're standing on. This story teaches us the importance of knowing our rights, standing up for what we believe in, and the power of community. It highlights how seemingly small acts of defiance can have a ripple effect, inspiring others and creating lasting change. It also serves as a cautionary tale against the abuse of power and the importance of questioning authority when it infringes upon fundamental rights. What are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever experienced a similar situation with an HOA or other governing body? Share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories and updates.